We have all these tools available to us as designers to build the things that we want to bring to the market to those specific people. The potential is so huge for that.
Joining me today is Robert Creighton, industrial designer, exhibition display designer, and instructor at Otis College of Design. Welcome to the podcast, Robert. Who are you and what do you do?
Thanks for having me at Questions for Designers. My name is Robert Creighton. I'm an industrial designer. That's what I still call myself. What I do professionally, my professional career for the last 30 years, primarily is designing experiences and exhibits. So that's my focus within the professional world. It's a subset of industrial design. And then I, as well, am an educator and I teach product design. And I teach at Otis College of Art and Design. I've taught there for 10 years. I've had my own company now for a long time. I don't know how many years it is now that I operate independently with other designers. We come together to develop projects together. Prior to that, I worked in New York for a number of years for a design firm there, for design consultancy there.
Great. What is the thread that kind of connects for you between practice and education, teaching, and that sort of thing?
That's a really good question. I think that I don't know if I would call it a thread, but there's these overlaps. There's things that you maybe they are threads that you draw upon. And I discovered that was interesting when I was in New York. I went back to school, so I was working full-time in a design studio, and then I went back to get a master's degree. And so I did one class a semester. So it took me 5 years to get the degree, which turned out to be great because I was solely focused on a single class, and I got to explore things that were very different, wildly different from the professional stuff that I was doing. So and what I've come back to over the years, and this is what I try and talk to the students about, and I think it was instructive when I was in New York going through this process, is understanding constraints. And so I think I say that word 80 times a day. I probably annoy everybody that I'm around when I talk about constraints, including my kids, my family. But fundamentally, that's the sort of the nature of design. And maybe I keep looking for sort of the distinctions between art and design. And I think maybe constraints are the difference. And so when I think about sort of educational institution versus professional practice, those two things, the constraints are different. And I think that's the thing that's interesting. So what I look for, and I think the thread that I'm trying to pull on, is really trying to, one, identify the constraints accurately so I can deliver the best product to a client, but also help the students understand what are the constraints for your project. So whether that's a student-driven project where they're defining the constraints around it, they're writing the design brief, or if that's one that I'm delivering that to them. But I think really centering the conversation around that, I really identifying what are you trying to deliver so you can figure out if what you're delivering is the right solution.
Awesome. What project throughout your career has taught you the most, whether it was a failure or a success?
That's a really good question too. There's a couple things. One, there's a couple, I can't say that there's a single one, but I'll go to one institution. So I've done a lot of work here over the years for the Natural History Museum here in Los Angeles. And the first project that I worked on there, I was brought in. Museums they're large bureaucracies, so they tend to be somewhat dysfunctional in various ways, and they're all a little different in that way. Some of them can burn a lot of money in those throughout that dysfunction. So in that case, on a project called The Age of Mammals, I was brought in really late. So they replaced the entire design team past schematic design, which is very rare because you've already spent more than a year on the research, the schematic design, and then they wholly shifted the design team. I was brought in as a piece of that design team to deliver purely mechanical interactives. So I couldn't run any electrical to them, and it's really, really complex subject matter around how mammals moved from South, Central, and North America back and forth. It's not simple stuff to try and deliver through some mechanical means. The lesson that I learned from that, and this is why I bring it up, is that there was a lot of scope creep throughout the project, and that was the thing that I learned. So when I looked back at how much, this is what I bid on it, how many hours did I actually spend on it? And I had bid out 250 hours, and I'd spent 450 hours. I thought, okay, so now my rate is in the, it's not in a good place. It's at the floor, not the ceiling. If I continue to do that, I go out of business. So it caused me to really think hard about how long does it take me to actually do these things. I had never thought about that before, and I'd been working for a long time by that point, but it never occurred to me to consider how long does it really take you to design something? What does that mean? Because it can be very blue sky, open-ended in terms of time, but if you're running a business, you can't have it be blue sky, open-ended. You have to lock it, but through some sort of constraint again. So I think that one in particular taught me a lot more about the business end of design and sort of respecting that piece of it that, okay, I can love the project, but in the end, I'm running a business. I have costs around that business. So I really have to think about it in those terms. That has not dramatically, but it definitely shifted how I thought about what I'm teaching the students as well. So that started to integrate that conversation a little bit more directly into the classes around, hey, look, how much time does this really take?
That is so important. I think that's one of the things that going through school, through design school and like all those programs, foundation, that really doesn't get covered a lot. We're kind of left to fend for ourselves and or hopefully luck upon partners or people that we work with that have some understanding. Or I think it's always been left to a place where, you'll find out when you work for somebody who already does this, you'll figure out the process and then adapt when you go out on your own. But it doesn't really promote us knowing those skills to be able to start that way.
It makes it much more difficult. And I think you can go, as a junior designer somewhere, you might get to sit in the meetings. You might get to see the budgets. If you see the budgets, you look at what you're being paid, you look at what they're billing out. You're like, wait a minute, where's the delta here is weird. Why? And then you start to look at overhead and software and all the rest of it. So those kinds of conversations are really important. If I just want to touch on this other project, same institution, but it taught me something different. That was it's called the Nature Lab. And in that project, I sat in meetings, and it was Nature Gardens / Nature Labs. It reinforced, so it wasn't a change, but it reinforced some thoughts that I had from a long time before, where I had previously worked with a fellow who we would bring in back in New York. He was a sculptor. And he would sit in these meetings with us, and I still have a portrait that he drew of me with coffee. He would sit and draw with coffee and pin up weird ideas on the walls. And I couldn't we're paying him a lot of money at the time, thousands of dollars a day to come into these meetings. I'm like, okay, this sounds like a pretty good gig. I want to do what that guy's doing. What's he actually doing? And it turned out that what he was doing was driving the conversation forward. And so that taught me a couple lessons. One, it taught me really the power of sketching. You want to be that guy in the meeting, that person in the meeting. You want to be the person who's drawing, because not everybody can visualize what we're thinking about, what we're talking about, what the conversation, where we're arriving or what we're exploring. If you can be that person, you can help drive that conversation, which is really critical. And then I would suggest even more critical, at least for my work, is that you quickly understand that you're a filter. And that's one of the lessons that I try and impart upon the students. As designers, I think we are in a very unique position as designers. There's almost no other position that operates in this gray zone in between the client, the visitor, and the manufacturer, the producer, whatever it is. If you look at engineering, it's about the product. It's not about the person at the end. Design operates in this weird space where you have to have that understanding of both those sides. And so my role then, I understood, was to take in this case, what a scientist was telling me, which is really deep and fascinating. They're experts. And then discern from that, distill from that, what do we really want someone to leave with when they leave the institution, when they leave this exhibit? And that gets, again, back to constraints, to defining what is it that we are really trying to say. And I would argue with product design, what is it that you really want this product to do? Who is it really that you're after? Who are you really trying to sell to? What kind of functionality does it really want to deliver? And when you look at the world, I know I'm jabbering here, when you look at the world, there's just so much product out there that has no reason to be. So I come back to the students then when I talk about this stuff. Look, you really have to define these things. You really have to understand what your role is here. If you accept that, embrace that role of being the person who's sketching the meetings, being the person who helps drive that conversation, you can get products that are better, which I think is what this should all be about ultimately.
And you also then have to factor in whether the client is a brand or what their motivations are and how you filter that into the process. Something you touched on of what you learned first about figuring out how to account for your efforts, your time. And that's a lot of times just the action of doing design, not the planning or the thought process that goes on. Have you ever found that once you had that knowledge, that it limited your, like, oh, I know what this is costing me to continue doing this? Do you just take it and use it as a learning process for the next time, or do you find yourself pulling back at all?
I think that I think there's a balance here between, some projects are going to be really profitable. It turns out it takes me 100 hours less than I bid on it, than I thought it was going to take me. That's profit. Other times it's 100 hours more than I bid on it. Okay, that's, I'm losing money on that, or I'm not making my profit is not as high on that. And that's the nature of business, right? Some things are more profitable than other things, and that's okay. I think beyond that, I got, for a time, was really strict with tracking my time. So I would track it in these 15-minute blocks, like every day, every hour. And it's a hassle to do it, but it was really instructive to help me understand, well, how long am I really spending on these things? How long do I want to spend on these things, given what the budget is, sort of the total budget for the project? Is it worth it for me? So I think that there's these questions that come up that it helps me understand, is the project worth doing? Like, is the value there from a monetary standpoint? Is the value there? And then is the value there because I love the project? Is the value there because I love the people that I'm working with? I had a conversation with my brother that ties in into this a little bit. He's a musician, and we talked about sort of projects that you work on, and that there are these three things, right? And it's the people you work with, the sort of quality of the project, and the money that you make. And if you get 2 out of 3 on any project, it's a win. Take the project. If you get 1 out of 3, don't take the project. If you get 3 out of 3, it's a home run. And it's really rare to get 3 out of 3. So I think that it hasn't been a limitation for me to think through the sort of the value, the ROI on a project, the budget there, but it has shifted a little bit, I think, the way in, to be perfectly frank, like how willing am I to put more time into this versus, okay, I know that I have this amount of time, I'm going to stop, we're going to move forward, because I'm not going to get a return on the value there, and my time would be better spent doing something else. That led me for some projects to say, okay, this is a good money making opportunity for me on this project. It's maybe not the kind of work that I want to do every time, but again, it's a good project financially. I will do that, but I'm not going to be emotionally invested in it. And therefore, I'm not going to feel the need to spend more time on it. Versus a project that I love the content, I love the client, and I'm willing to, to work on it over time.
Put a little more sweat into it.
A little more sweat into it. Yeah, and that's okay. And so if I can find the balance there, that I can accept projects that meet those requirements for me based on whatever the project is.
So really that experience of learning what it really takes to do those projects has kind of allowed you to vector on
for sure
those 2 out of 3 as much as possible, and learn to see the potential for, oh, this one's going to be 1 out of 3 or maybe 0 out of 3, and go, you know what? No, thank you.
I have, over the years, when I first moved out here, I did some work with the Getty. It's a big institution. They hire a lot of outside designers to do things. And it wasn't, it's a great institution, but there's not a huge amount of design that goes into, physical design that goes into art museum design, typically, because art museums, they're more often than not willing to, or not interested in hanging the art in a weird way, because it's a $50 million painting. They're not going to do that, right? Or something else. So the result of that is that the galleries, the exhibits, they're fairly standard. You know what you're going to get when you walk into them. You're dealing with color, you're dealing with some graphics, but not even that much there. So I have tended to, over in my career, shifted away from that. However, there are some institutions that I work with, and it's not because I love the design that I'm doing. It's because I love working with the institution. I get to go there. I get to go in their vault. I get to walk around with these people who are just brilliant and have these just lovely conversations about art that I could never have otherwise. And so that brings value to me, to my life, to me personally.
And you get paid to do it.
And I get paid a little bit. So it's not like a huge amount. And the design
But
isn't
it's not the other way
spectacular.
around.
Yeah, but
Right.
it's okay because
Yeah.
I just adore having these conversations with the curators. It's so much fun. I just love it. So there's value there sometimes for those kinds of projects, even if maybe the money's not, it's not bad, but it's not like I'm not doing it for the money and I'm not really doing it for the design either. It's good design, but I'm not getting to do something really, exploring some cool new idea or form or shape or anything like that. But instead, it's really about understanding and learning for me more about the world around me. And that's fantastic. That part of it's fantastic.
And I think a lot of times those projects enable you to kind of breathe,
That's true.
between kind of these really intense projects that
Yeah.
you're giving it all, you're digging in, and it's like there's a lot more at stake, that sort of thing. When you're designing displays and exhibitions and these types of installations, is your objective more about the information, emotion, or behavior, or combination? How do you approach communicating displays?
I mean, I think it's a mixture, right? It's a mix of all three, and I think it really depends on if I think about it as levers that you're pulling. So lighting can be a lever, graphics can be a lever, color is a lever, the physical form of the environment that you're building, so the actual furniture that you're building, that's a lever. How you actually are engaging with the content, again, whether that's a graphic, whether that's a screen, whether that's some sort of mechanical mixture, whether that's some sort of artifact that's there. I think understanding what those levers are and then manipulating them based on what you think you want the outcome to be. So I think in the cases of these exhibits, and I'm thinking like specifically of like science exhibits, which really tend to be phenomena based. So I want to learn about tornadoes. I'm going to go to the museum, or I want to learn about dinosaurs. It's about phenomena, some sort of typically physical phenomena that's in the world. That phenomena exists in the world. It's maybe something that I've experienced as a human being. I may have experienced it, but the scientists are brilliant. We're going to deliver to you some new way of thinking about it. We'd love you to think about the world, the wind, the dirt, the water in a different way versus then sort of cultural exhibits where with some sort of, something happened in the world. We're going to tell you about that thing that happened. So there was some event that occurred, right? Some rather historical, important event, something that's going to occur now, or a way that we can, think about a person, a people, a culture, et cetera. And we're going to talk to you about that. So I think in both those cases, for me, the content's king on all these projects. If we do it right, we really understand, and we are, again, acting as a filter and understanding, okay, what is it that the institution, in this case, wants to deliver to the visitor? What do they really want the visitor to leave with? And then what's the balance of things that sets you up to make it most effective for you to leave with that message? So if it's like, I think about it typically as like, this is what I say to clients, we do the run-through test, particularly with kids, but adults do this too. If I run through the exhibit, what do I leave with? Like that's the top line titles. That's if I hit the interactive for 5 seconds, what do I take away from it? So in something like the Nature Lab many years ago, it literally was scientists draw, scientists categorize, scientists look closer. Those were the actual terms that we wanted people to leave with. So to achieve that, what's the most effective way? And so in some cases, again, that's a big graphic that happens because that's just the most effective way to deliver it. Sometimes it's a video because we want you to feel an emotion, and that's a lot easier in moving pictures with audio than it is in a static photo. Sometimes it's something physical, so we're going to ask you to draw because scientists draw. And if I can draw, well, now maybe I'm a scientist. Now maybe I'm a citizen scientist, and I start to look at the world differently. If we go outside, I've used this many times as an example because it was the very first concept that I had for one of those projects. And it was literally just, I drew an arrow or a set of arrows like, okay, we're going to put an arrow outside and it's going to say, look closer. And it's going to point at something that we want you to look at. That's it. So if I'm walking through the garden, there's a thing that points down at whatever it is, the frog eggs that are on the bottom of the leaf. Like we're going to point at that, literally point at it, physically point at it, because that's what we want you to do. We want you to look closer. And in asking people to do that, my hope is that the next time they're on a hike, the next time, even if the next time they're walking through, the city somewhere, they're going to look at the underside of a leaf to see what's there. They're going to look a little closer for a little bit longer at the ground that's under their feet that they don't ever notice, where there are pill bugs and ants and all these other creatures. So my hope is that with something like that, we can be very explicit, look closer. And then in other cases, again, it's about, we're going to set you up for an emotion, which means we want you to feel something when you walk in. I worked on a project recently in Palm Springs at the Agua Caliente Cultural Museum there. And this is section 14. I won't get into the long story there about it. Palm Springs is a really interesting place. I didn't know, one of the benefits for me working on these is that I don't know anything about any of this stuff. So I get to be an amateur, I get to learn, and then I get to try and, again, be in that space of the visitor. What are they going to learn? Because I don't know anything else. So what do I need to learn about it? Palm Springs has this very strange structure. If you really look at it's a grid. It's a weird grid. One of them is section 14 at any rate. And there's a long sordid history there of people, houses were burned, people were forced off land, like that sort of thing. So how do we make people feel that without, one, burning a house, two, like they didn't want to have photos that were taken of the houses being burned. So in the end, in that case, we construct the primary structure in that exhibit was this sort of, I would call it house adjacent, house-like object that contained a theater for you to sit and listen. So the structure itself, which was open-walled for the most part, so you saw the studs, the intention there was to suggest house. Not be literal house, but hey, we're in a house-like space. Home and house are something that's very emotional for people. So if we can get you there just a little bit, then you can look at this exhibit in a different way. You're going to approach the content in a different way. And that's just the setup. That's just, here's this structure that is clearly referencing home, clearly referencing house, without it having a pitched roof and a white picket fence. So I think in that case, it's really, you're trying to tug a little bit on the emotion through the physical structure. And in other cases, you want the physical structure to just get out of the way, and you're going to look at the painting. So I hope I'm answering the question, but it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of all this, and there's all those levers, again, in there to, to make you feel things.
So generally, and I think you touched on this a little bit of how do you know when it's working, but it's whether you've gotten that behavior or the emotion, but what you're never really sure is you're hoping that once they leave, they'll look under that leaf or pass that information on to someone else. But are there key notifiers to you as, and maybe this comes back from the client, or is this something that you're able to observe whether or not what you're doing is working, as opposed to, well, this fulfilled the criteria?
Sure.
Right.
That's a really good question. And I mean, for me, typically the project's done and I'm out. I have zero contact with it afterwards for the most part. Sometimes we're asked to come back in, redesign something. Something's really not working. If something, over the years, I've done a lot of mechanical interactives.
Can you explain mechanical interactives? Because I think that's something that
really
maybe we know this kind of stuff, but maybe
so I would maybe classify it as just sort of like three things. So you have a screen-based interactive, and maybe there's a fourth that you theoretically could say VR or something like that. Although I wouldn't put that quite in the same classification. But you'd have screen-based interactives, which when I started were touch screens, but they were single-point touch screens. This is like late 90s, so no multi-touch at the time. Nobody knew how to use them either. The institutions used them very poorly. They put way too much content in it because nobody had designed the phone yet, so no one knew what the sort of framework was for interacting with digital content other than like, Web 1.0, 1995, where you're just scrolling through things and there's a hyperlink.
And you're making fake buttons instead
that
of
kind of stuff.
Physical buttons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what we wind up with now are a lot of two things: touch screens and then very large scale installations where it's either detecting your position in space and you're interacting with the content, but either way you're interacting with digital content, typically through either a screen or maybe through a projection, but typically screen-based. And I say typically screen-based because projectors have a tendency to break, to burn out, those sorts of things. So typically screen-based. Screens are fairly robust. They can handle 500,000 visitors in a year without a problem, that kind of thing. If you go one step away from that, you could get to electromechanical interactives. So those are things where there's a mechanical touch point, there's a lever, there's something else. But what I'm actually doing is when I shift the lever, it's triggering a solenoid, that's triggering an event that occurs either on a screen or somewhere else physically in the space. So a ball drops because I shift the lever, those sorts of things. So that would be electromechanical. And then the other one would be purely mechanical. So I move a lever, I'll go to a lever, but I move a lever and some physical thing moves in direct response to that. It's geared or it's, there's some sort of
Direct physical
physical
connection.
attachment. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So my tendency, you can deliver anything on a screen. Because it's a universal computer, like a computer's a universal machine, so you can mimic anything you want, but it's not the best solution for all content. And so what you want to find is, okay, it's two things. What is the appropriate delivery mechanism for the content that we want to communicate? And then we want to cover our bases in terms of what is, broadly speaking, the age bracket that's coming in here. And museums often will say, like, 0 to 99 years old.
Of course.
Everybody. Okay. So if you're going to do that, then you really, again, it sets you up for, again, here's a title. If I do the run-through test, I run through 5 seconds, I understand what the title of the exhibit is. Then there's the sort of tertiary text. It's a little bit more information. Maybe, not a super young kid would read it, but a slightly older kid would read it. And then there's paragraphs below that because now I'm standing there with my grandparents or my parents, and they need something to do. If you think about that in terms of interactives, you want to hit a range of different ways of engaging with content because in a screen, typically it's deeper content because the screen can support deeper content. In a mechanical interactive, it's really like one point of content that I want to deliver effectively. And I can do that very fast because nobody's going to stay there for more than 20 seconds or something like that. That's what I would figure. On a screen, you might get them for a minute or two, but most people don't stay at these things for very long. So what you're hoping for then in terms of what you wind up developing in terms of screen-based, electromechanical, mechanical, is a range of interactions, a range of types of interactions so that we can cover our bases in terms of whoever the visitor is, they're going to come in. They might really be entranced by drawing something. They might really be entranced by reading something. We're going to hope to give you a range of ways into the content so that you're engaged. And so that hopefully you either stay longer or come back. And just to come back to your original question, those are the things that institutions typically look for. So what's the stickiness of the exhibit? How long are people staying? How long do we want them to stay and how long are they staying? What's the return visit? So how many times are you coming back to do this? Is the content deep enough based on the longevity of the exhibit? So if it's a 6-month thing or if it's a 6-year thing or if it's a 20-year thing, how many times are you going to come back? Is it still engaging if you come back 3 or 4 times, right? So I think that beyond that, we do, if we have time, and this is a budget issue, we use testing on the front end, particularly for mechanical stuff, but digital stuff too if we can. Sometimes it depends on who you're working with. Sometimes it's harder or easier to prototype those things, but you really go to, sometimes it's like all your students would know this, all my students would know this, like basic prototypes. We're talking about cardboard printouts, but the content's going to wind up on a screen. But we're going to step you through it, and there's going to be a facilitator there, and we actually go to the institution, set it up in a space, maybe not the space, but in a space. The facilitator tries to gather visitors to come over, and we walk them through it. And then you sort of ask them questions at the end. What'd you take away? And so we can sort of test, okay, are you getting the content that we think you're going to get? Or is it way off?
Right.
And you're seeing something that we really didn't intend for you to see.
It's a bit of a low stakes way of
for sure
getting those answers before finding out, oh, we've spent $500,000 on this.
Yeah. We've done that before. I mean, I've been on projects where I worked on one where the idea was I really wanted to provide them with different ways to see nature. And so there's classic ways to do, like a borescope is a classic way to do that, puts you down at a tiny view. A periscope is another way to do that. So if I like periscope up in the trees, we're talking about birds, this is great, let's build a periscope. You can do that really simply with a mirror and a telescope. It's dirt simple to do it. It won't survive outside, and it definitely won't survive visitors. So then you're into a fairly complex object, a fairly expensive object, and they built one. It was a $90,000 build for a prototype, which is a lot for something that never made it into the exhibit. And that was so we could test it. They really wanted to test it sort of without anybody facilitating, it turned out that that was not a great way to do it. We should have built a cheap one, tested with that, and then discovered, this isn't going to work that well.
It might have been okay that it didn't last.
Yeah,
on the
exactly.
Yeah. You mentioned the project No Justice, No Peace. What did that project mean to you?
So this was, I spoke to somebody about this recently, and it was interesting to reflect back on it. This was a project, it was super fast. So it was interesting just thinking about how projects come to be. This was the first project I had worked with CAM, California African American Museum. That was the first time I had worked with them, but I had worked with my colleague, Marcy Boudreau from Picnic Design we've now worked together for, 20 some years on, I don't know how many projects. I can't keep count anymore. I think we have 4 or 5 going right now in various places. This was the first time we had worked with this institution. They had a really good curator. They were sort of reimagining themselves, so they were willing to try something, willing to spend a little bit more on the construction, frankly, but they had this very strict timeline. So from concept to opening was 2 months, which is super fast to include the build. So the benefit of that is that we didn't have a lot of time to noodle on the idea and like say, okay, well, could it be this radius? Could it be this radius? Like, no, we can't. Yeah, we just got to go. It also happened to be, so this is 2016. So this is post-Trump. And critically, I think at the time for me, this is when Ferguson happened. So there was active stuff occurring in Ferguson where things were being burnt down. There was a part and parcel of the conversation we were going to have here around No Justice, No Peace, which was centered around 92 in LA. The equivalent event was occurring right then in Ferguson. And so it was the first time I'd worked on a project where I thought, okay, the content, albeit historical, that we're looking at, it has real relevance and real purchase right now, today, for us to understand what is happening today. I don't think I had ever worked on a project prior to this where I understood the direct impact that this kind of an exhibit, a cultural exhibit, could have. So that part of it I think was really interesting. And then beyond that, it comes back time and time again to this idea that I'm an amateur. So if I don't think about myself as a professional in the sense that I don't know the content, I don't pretend to know it. In this case, I wasn't in LA, I was in Arizona, but I lived through that time. I remember it vividly watching it on TV, but I had one point of view on it. And that was the thing that was so interesting to me working on this particular project, is that I have one view. That view is mediated literally through TV at the time about what is happening. So now when you talk to people who are experts around these things, who are deep researchers on these things, and now we tell the story of Second Great Migration, Zoot Suit riots, 92, 68, like all these events that occurred that lead up to 92, this question of, is the right word to describe it a riot, an uprising, or something else? And it's all these words are used to describe these things depending on your point of view of it. So for me, it was like eye-opening to think about what they would argue was the sort of inevitability of this event. I saw it always as a spontaneous event, but if you look at the history, it does not feel spontaneous anymore.
It was coming.
You can see these threads again rising through society again and again. All these things are occurring. So that's the LA Police Department at that time under I don't remember the name of the main guy. There's just all this series of things. That's the drug war in the late 80s and the 90s. All these things occur leading up to this event. So the really nice thing was that I felt that the curators, it wasn't a prescribed, I didn't get the sense designing that it was a prescribed, they didn't want you to feel a specific thing about it. They wanted to deliver it and help you understand all these things that led up to it. But they didn't say, you have to feel this way about it. And I think that's kind of the best.
So the content was more context.
It is, and it was, yeah. And I think that part of it, for me, was just fantastic because we could really deliver without needing to scream about it. There were 2 screens that were showcasing the beating of Rodney King right dead center in the space. We brought in a police car into the space. They were willing to do that. We were able to build a wall at a CMU block. They were willing to go to materials that I really wanted to use that were evocative of LA as a highly urbanized environment. They didn't go to the chain link. I really wanted to have chain link fence in there. That didn't work, but everything else did. And so the structures, they were simple. The finishes were simple. It was raw. And I think the rawness of it, at least, again, sort of like Section 14, at an underlying level, it gives you a sense of something, a sense of a feeling. What is it like to live in a space that has a lot of pressure on it? And the pressures come in many different places. And if I haven't lived that experience, maybe I can get a sense of it if I walk through the space. Maybe I can learn a little bit more about it. So we showed those videos. We showed the video, and I am forgetting her name. Right before the riot, there was a woman who was killed in it's a famous event in this Korean store, and the owner shot her in the head. That video was in the exhibit as well. Her shirt, like a shirt from her family, was in the exhibit. So it was really like impactful content, really impactful artifacts, but displayed, presented in a way that says, hey, you should understand this. You should think about this. Not saying you have to think about it in this way. I thought it was really from a content standpoint, I think it was a really successful exhibit. And I think because they understood what they wanted to do from a design standpoint, again, we get back to constraints, we understood what our job was to deliver. And that made it easier for us to design it in such a short time frame. And I think ultimately made it a better exhibit because it was very clear how they wanted to tell the story, the kind of context they wanted to give around it. Yeah.
What do projects like these with a lot of deep meaning teach you about the responsibility of being a designer?
That's a really good question. I think like two sides really quickly. One, I think teaching product design, I think it's about, and this is separate from this kind of a project specifically, but I think it speaks to the role of the designer, the responsibility of a designer. For my students, when I talk to them about things, it really has to do with what's the impact of the objects that you're designing. Should you make this object at all? Should it exist in the world?
Right.
Please ask yourself that question. If you're going to make another chair, there's been millions of chairs made, there's millions of shoes made, there's millions of bags made, everything's like that. Why make another one? So the why becomes central to any conversation that I have with a student about design, about the physical object, about taking raw material out of the ground, making an object, delivering it to the world, and then having it wind up in a bin somewhere. You really want to know why you're doing that. So I think there's a huge responsibility, I think, for designers to consider those things. From the other side of it, the experience side, I think it's, for me, fundamentally, because I've worked with brands sometimes to do brand activations, but most of my work has been in museums. It speaks to the responsibility that I think the institutions have to, and I really have, much more so than I used to, firmly believe this now. There are very few public squares left. And I don't think online is an equivalent at all. So a museum, an institution is one place, I think libraries are another one, in which those kinds of conversations around public issues, around shared culture, around questions, difficult questions, can take place. Museums they're entities that have to raise money, they can be political, all those things apply. So I'm not, foolish about this stuff, but I think that the institutions have an ability to provide a space to talk about some of these things. And if you do it in a way where you're really presenting the context, then I think I think it's a lovely thing too. I think it's a responsibility of an institution to be able to do that. And that's where then my role comes in, is to try and help them create a space that allows people to come in and not be bombarded with a particular point of view, but instead say, hey, let's really look at these. This is really worth thinking about. There's something here that is really meaningful. And again, that can be that if it's a design museum, that can be the chairs that were designed, the history of chairs. If it's the Science Center, it can be the dinosaurs that are there. If we look at the Science Center here, they have their space shuttle that they're, in an upright position.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. Why do that? Yeah. Why tell that history? That's the responsibility, is that some history, some information, some, I think, concepts of how we got to where we are and maybe where we're going and how we might get there, I think are really important to talk about. And again, I know I'm repeating myself, but these kinds of institutions are one of the few places we can still do that publicly and physically do that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's awesome to be a part of that. I mean, to be able to be a part of that.
Absolutely. Robert, what's inspiring you right now, maybe outside of design, as you kind of look around at what's going on in the world?
That's a really good question. I think there's a couple things. I can be very, and my students know this about me. I was going to say the word hate is probably too strong, but there's a lot of stuff in the world that I really dislike, like viscerally dislike design around a lot of things. And so I have strong reactions to objects. I hope that's a good thing. I tell the students, hey, look, have a strong reaction. I want to feel your strong reaction. So if you don't have a strong reaction, if it's all meh, then you didn't do your job, honestly, because we don't need more of those products. We don't need more products that are just sort of like middle of the road products. There's some stuff, yeah, okay, in the hospital, maybe you need that, but you also need people to feel in that kind of a context. You need people to feel emotions. You need to make people feel better. That's design. And much of what we see in the world is just sort of like it's another flat table, it's, mauve, it's beige, whatever. So I have very strong opinions about that. So as a result of that, sometimes I feel like I should go live in a cave and just sort of remove myself. That's when I'm in my darker places. In my happier places, what I see from a design standpoint, what I see are designers all over the world exploring ideas. One, exploring materials. Material is something that really gets me going. Like I just love the work that's being done around all kinds of new materials. It's the one place I would say that I'm really genuinely excited about AI is the potential for material development and its impact on sustainability. I think the potential is massive there, and there's huge business opportunities, I think, around redesigning things with new materials. There's huge problems, and so therefore wherever there are problems, there are big opportunities. So I get really excited and inspired by other designers who are out there exploring these things. I think beyond that, it's just sort of the beauty that I see people making sometimes. And so those are typically the folks that I follow. Sure. I don't spend a huge amount of time on platforms, but on Instagram, those are the people that I typically follow. It's like, geez, it's just the most beautiful objects. And I think beauty, it's a underappreciated asset for humanity. It's something that I think we feel when we're in nature. It's something that I hope that we aspire to when we're designing things, is to create those kinds of experiences. I don't think I'd ever be able to design anything that even comes close to like the most lowly tree in terms of beauty, but I can aspire to do that. I can aspire to be around that. I can aspire to help my students see those things. So those are the things I think from a design standpoint that really get me excited, is when I see people willing to ask those questions, willing to explore those ideas, again, around materials, around form, around beauty, in a way that I think to some degree we've lost, I would argue, as we've come to, for the last, certainly in my professional career, for the last 25, 30 years, we pray at the altar of technology. And I have a hard time with that with design. I have been waiting for a long time now to see who's going to do the next thing, because we have been in the Apple universe for a long time. They unquestionably had the best industrial design team in the world for a period of time, a block of time, like 10 years. It was just astonishing what they were creating. That's great. It's all aluminum. It's all recyclable. It's all simple. It's all Dieter Rams. It's all Johnny. I think that's awesome. It's great. And for certain products, that makes sense. But there's so many other objects in our lives that have retained that kind of expression. I keep thinking, geez, I'd like a little more color.
Again, does it need to be an Apple product?
Indeed.
Why? Yeah.
When we talk to students, like, look, go back and look at Memphis. I don't love everything they did, but go back and look at how expressive it was. Like, sometimes we need those sorts of things. So I teach a product history class now. We go through the movements. I don't spend a huge amount of time on it, but I touch on all these art and design movements, and you see when they happen. World War I happens. Everybody dies. You're going to try and rethink the world. And you get just a flourishing of movements that come out of it with weird manifestos about all kinds of crazy stuff. They disappear very quickly, but the impact that they have is profound. You go World War II, same thing, post-World War II, you have this flourishing of movements that come out of that are really, really interesting, that couldn't have happened before. So I wonder, where are we now? And we're in a... How do we react to what's going on now? And that's sort of what I'm waiting to see. I can do that in my own work, or attempt to do that in my work, and I certainly try and do that with the students that I have. But I see it in little points. And I think when you're in that moment where it's happening, you don't always recognize that it's happening. So I wonder where we're going to be if we look back 10 years from now.
Sure.
What it'll look like.
Robert, as a designer, an educator, and a father, what does success look like to you now?
That's a really good question. I could talk for the next 4 hours about this, and I will try and contain myself to not do that. Yeah. Yes. But really quickly, before we had kids, we lived in New York. My wife and I, in 2000, 3, I think, we sat at a pizza joint. We had some pizza and we talked about what we wanted the future to look like for us. We had a
Sure.
very direct conversation around what do we want to do. Neither one of us wanted to stop working. And so for the first 10 years of my kids' lives, we both worked half-time. And so we actually physically split our days every single day for 10 years. And so I would work in the mornings from like 6 to 12, and then Heidi would work in the afternoons from 1 to 6. And that allowed us to stay working professionally and to spend a huge amount of time with our kids, which was really important for me. They obviously don't need that as much anymore, but that gets back to balance. And so we made less money as a direct result of that, no question about it. I couldn't grow my business as quickly, all those things. But those are times that I will never have the opportunity to experience again. I knew I would have plenty of time to work, but I would never have that. Those moments are unique, and so you don't get to have them back. So I think it's that question of success for me feels like balance. And so what that balance looks like day to day, month to month, year to year, I think it shifts a little bit. For me right now, I would say that I'm missing one thing. Right now, it's like I used to think that it was a three-legged stool was my business. So it was three-legged stool was my professional work,
Yeah.
which was consulting, teaching, and then my own work. And it's that third one that I never seem to have time for, my own work. Because there's a fourth thing, and that's being a dad, and that's the most important one. So so success would be adding in a little bit more time in my world to be able to work on the projects, my own projects that I would like to bring to market.
Great.
Finding time for that's hard.
When you're talking about dealing with students and pushing them to that, asking the why, how do you get them to see beyond maybe the surface level thinking of, well, it's cool, or, oh, it's, this is the next thing. How do you dig at the why?
There's a couple ways to do that that I found. One of them, it depends on the class that I'm teaching. For a long time, I taught an LCA class, so life cycle assessment class, where the students had to redesign a product, but through the process of an LCA. So you had to physically disassemble the product literally down into all its constituent parts. You would not take apart things off the circuit board, but I would have them actually strip the insulation off the wires so you could weigh the copper separate from the PVC. And you would then have to weigh all of that. Then you do calculations. How accurate they are now, I don't know, but they were reasonably accurate. So wherein you wind up with a carbon footprint for that product. And critically, we understand where the material comes from, or at least you can estimate where the material comes from. So where's the copper coming from? Where's the aluminum coming from? The bauxite being mined? Like you go all the way back to the beginning. So when you get to that point, you start to see that this product, it's not just the object that's in my hand. It's all this other stuff that came out of the ground. It's all natural, one way or another. It all comes out of the ground. It's heavily refined, but it all comes out of the ground. And then at the end of life, it's got to go somewhere else. And as they experience, oftentimes you can't take the stuff apart. It's not designed to be disassembled, right? So, and then in that process, I ask the students to redesign it. Broadly speaking, like I'm going to go in and I'm going to change these things. Sometimes it's going from an electronic version to a mechanical version. We get rid of the batteries, some other things. It's not delivering it as a service instead of a product. We didn't go that route. But the benefit of it was to begin to understand the why. Like, why am I making the choices that I'm making? So, and what's the impact of making those choices? So I've, in that class, tended to focus on what's the impact of the choices that you make. Because I use Apple a lot as an example because I remember these things very vividly when they would reduce their packaging for a MacBook and they would show you how many they could fit on a plane when they were flying the stuff in. And they could fit a whole bunch more because the packaging was reduced. That seems like a minor thing to change the packaging, but if you're making 1 million of something, it's profound. If you're making 1 million of something and you remove 4 screws from it, that's 4 million screws that are now not being produced. That's a good answer to the question, why? Why am I making this choice? With the other projects and the other classes that I've taught, particularly Senior Studio, we spent a lot of time with them trying to dig in to, okay, you come into the class, you want to make a piano. Like, all right, why do you want to make a piano? Tell me why. And so that requires me to try and channel some of the professors that I had who were much harder hitting, frankly. They were not my friend. They were not friendly to me. And that was not the goal. The goal was for them to force me to dig deep into the why I'm doing this thing. So I try and get a little bit of that to dig into it with the students so that they can actually answer that question, because ultimately somebody's going to ask them that question when they show them this project in their portfolio. They made a piano. Like, there's a million pianos. Why'd you make another piano? What's different about it? Why'd you make it out of that wood? The whys, there's so many whys in a design. So we try and get the students to understand that, including the big one, which is, why are you doing this at all?
Yep.
Mostly through conversation.
Yeah. I'm experiencing this right now with senior industrial designers preparing their self-initiated project for graduation, and them having to go back through and ask, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And especially now you're at midpoint in the semester, you've worked on it for several weeks, probably something longer than you've worked on continuously as a student. And it's from you, not assigned, like the prompt is, come up with something. And then you get halfway through and go, why? And if they don't have a good reason, they really need to dig for that reason or shift, and you don't have a lot of time to shift. So hopefully we catch them early enough on not being their friend.
Indeed. We try in a similar fashion. And I think that we spend a fair amount of time on them writing the design brief. They've never written a brief before. So, okay, let's write the brief. Let's go through that process of writing the brief. The brief's going to help you understand the why. It's going to help you define the why. What are you really looking for here? So, ideally, they have a clear brief that gives them clear guardrails and constraints to work within. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's the goal.
Yeah. And it's also one of those things that you're able to point back to them. You wrote this. Are you sticking to this? Does this still apply?
Yeah.
Was that original why an assumption that now you've done 4 weeks of research and realized, oh, that wasn't real. That was what I had in my head, but now I've asked all these people or done some digging, and all of a sudden, oh, yeah, this doesn't really need to exist. I actually had one of our previous guests, his senior project, after he got halfway through it, he was like, I realized my answer is the real solution to this problem is designing nothing.
Right.
And I'm like, yes, but you're still in industrial.
Yeah.
So you need to shift how you're asking that question. What the brief is rather than trying to solve everything, you have to look
exactly
at
right.
How do you make a difference?
That's a really good way of putting it. How do you make where's that difference? And again, for me, that gets back to the screws. Like, look,
exactly.
If you remove the screws, that's it making a difference.
It's making a difference.
It doesn't change the whole world,
Right.
but the product's not going to do that. It is incremental. Every so often, there really is a groundbreaking product. It's very rare.
It's very rare.
Yeah, most of us never get to work on anything like that in our lifetimes.
Robert, you've stayed active with IDSA throughout your career, and now especially on the educator side. How has that kind of evolved for you from the motivations for being involved?
I mean, I think that at the start in New York, it was a way to get together. So you're trying to expand a network. So that was good, I think. They'd have events there. And that's a pretty strong network there, IDSA network. And that was also true for me as an alumni of a school as well. They had a pretty strong network there for that too. I think out here, in part it started out with me to do two things. One, wanting to get to know other designers in and around Southern California. And then ultimately, I think I'm a firm, and this is something I'm like a broken record talking to students about this. And I don't like the word networking. I don't have a better word for it.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the action of going and meeting people leads to things. And the key is you don't know what it's going to lead to. So you have to just go meet people. And so I have found very consistently, I would go do something, there'd be some event, I'd be working on some projects, but maybe I don't have anything lined up, 6 months from now. And then I would go to some event, and 3 months later, something would come that was somehow connected to me being there. Because I gave somebody a card, they knew somebody who knew this. It's almost never is it direct in my experience. It's usually some sort of adjacency, some, 6 degrees of separation kind of a thing. And I think that part of it has been really helpful for me. And so for me, in thinking about the students, like, look, you have this, you do have a professional organization. There are these chapters in different places. So wherever you move, it's one of the ways that you can start to get connected to other
You can
designers.
plug in.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
also a way, and this is really critical when you're young. I think about it more for being a young person. It's just really good practice. You go to an event, you gotta kind of talk to people. And it's not all of us are good at that. Not all of us enjoy it, but it's really important to do it. And so it's a muscle. And if you flex that muscle over and over again, you get better at it. And I think that that's just sort of the IDSA as an entity is one of those things that allows you to do that, which I think is really good. The other thing from a student standpoint, and you and I have talked about this before, the Student Merit Awards is a way to gather the students, to recognize the students. So for me, that's really important. Like, look, we do have students who are operating at this high level. I want to help recognize them. And importantly, I want to get them in front of other people so they can hear from other people. So we try and do that with portfolio reviews and other things. But I think this is one of the places where in this day and age, maybe it doesn't always maybe it's frowned upon, certainly in some schools, certainly in elementary schools. It's a competition.
Yeah.
That does matter.
Our industry is a competition.
You're going to be bidding against other people with things.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, and I think critically, it doesn't mean that, and this has been my experience in IDSA professionally overall, and that is that I have met very few people professionally who hoard information. People are really generous because the truth is that there's just more work than any one person can do. So yeah, I'm going to lose projects to this person or that person. That's fine. I'm not going to dislike them or stop talking to them because of it. I'm going to try and work with them. I'm going to try and learn from them, like all of those things. So I think IDSA is one of the ways to begin to learn how to do those things.
So how do you, especially now in our digital age where information's everywhere, how do you feel organizations like that maintain relevance, or is it primarily the physical interaction and networking, or what do you see as the benefit for students beyond just joining an online resource, if you will?
I think that's a really good question, and I would say to your point, your earlier point, the in-person stuff really matters. And so if that is if that's a national event that occurs, that can be good. But I think this sort of the chapter events are really good in that way. The smaller connections are really good in that way. And I would say specifically with IDSA, one of the things, there are things that came out of the pandemic that I'm really not happy with, that we've sort of stuck around. There's other things that have stuck around that have been really good. Then I think 2017 was the first IDSA Women in Design conference. That one was in San Diego, I think. And I drove down for that because I figured, like, look, I have all these students who are women. I need to know what are people experiencing coming out. There were like 3 guys in the room with a whole bunch of female designers. They're really talented designers. And I just got to talk to a lot of people there, which was one, I was thrilled that they were, because of some other stuff with the AIA that I was working on with my wife, which suffers from some of the same challenges of women in design. The benefit was that we were in person, so I could meet all these people. I could talk to them in a different way than I could talk to through some other medium. And at the time, there wasn't really a lot of video group calls. So that's one of the things that in the pandemic that IDSA and coming out of the pandemic did exceedingly well and still does, and that's the deep dive conferences that are online. Those ones have just routinely, I've loved them. They're focused, so I think they're focused. It's less expensive because you don't have to fly somewhere. It's a really good platform for that kind of a conference, which is really focused. For a broader conference, I don't think it works as well. But for something that's really focused, it's great. And I think what I've leaned on with the students is going to those things is good for one primary reason if I were to pick one, and that is that you have the opportunity sometimes to talk to designers that you will never, ever have the opportunity to talk to again. And so that has happened to me routinely. I mean, I've been around a long time, but I'm not a world famous designer, but I've been able to talk to people who I really respect their work. And there's just no other way for me there's no easy way because they live in another country, they live in another state. There's no simple way for me to get to talk to them. But through the deep dives, I've been able to stay on, ask questions, be a little bit of a pest, and get to know people.
Right.
And then get
Right.
connected with them professionally and use them as a resource. Like talk to them about things, ask questions about things. So I think that
Or
part
they
of it
may
is
find
fantastic.
that you are a good resource for them.
Hopefully that too.
Yeah.
That's been, I think, really, really a really good outcome out of
Yeah.
the pandemic. And I think IDSA, to their credit, took advantage of that and has
That's great.
That's been really good. Yeah.
Looking forward from your vantage point, what do you see is needed the most in design over the next decade?
I mean, it's a tough question because the word design is like so big, right? So
Right.
what is it? What does that encompass? And I think, I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I really don't know. If I were spitballing things out, I will have opinions about everything. Sure. I don't know what needs to happen. I would suggest a couple things. One, I think from the experience side, from the museum side, I think there's great growth potential there because I think it's the potential for bringing people together in physical spaces. That's always been the strength of the work that I do, is trying to bring people together and have some shared experience. And again, whether that shared experience, I used to do a lot of work for brands when I was first starting out. So whether that shared experience is around a brand, it's a Google store or whatever, whether that shared experience is Coachella and it's a music venue, or it's Meow Wolf and it's an art experience kind of thing, or if it's a museum, a sort of classic institution, whatever it is, I think there's huge potential for leveraging those kinds of experiences to get people off the phone, out into the real world, and meeting people face to face. And that has profound impacts, without going too deep into these things, around young men, around kids. Like there's so much research around the challenges that we're facing right now. So I think one of the places we can try and help with that is through those kinds of physical experiences. So that's the first thing. The second thing is around that I think where design really does or could have an impact moving forward, and that's around materials. So I think really doing material exploration and working at designs from a material lens, through a material lens. So you can come at a project from many different angles. Really coming at it from the material side, I think, is really worthwhile. I think we need to see more of that, because I think that if we can reimagine how we use different kinds of materials, we will bring the public along with us, ultimately. It takes time, but I think you have to have people really exploring materials to do that. And then I think the third thing, I think that I would like to see designers, play two things really quickly. One, play a bigger role in larger policy discussions, honestly. And I've been thinking about this for a long, long time. But I mean, you have the occasional, sort of chief design officer at the state level or at the city level. They have had some of those positions. I just think I routinely come back to these questions around like traffic flows. You may be familiar with Don Norman. Many years ago, there was a discussion on Core 77 around design thinking, around that term. And he wrote this article where he was sort of disparaging the term design thinking because it was being used like the word innovation is being used, right? It's just meaningless at some point. So then people wrote about that, they critiqued it, they commented on it, and then he wrote a follow-up article. And the thing that was really striking to me about what he wrote ultimately, and I've carried this with me for a long time, because this was, 10, 15 years ago, was that he talked about, okay, well, maybe design thinking, maybe I don't need to be so negative about it. Maybe it's how it's being talked about, how it's being used, and ultimately who uses it and in what way. And so designers are well-suited to ask, and this was his term, ask the dumb questions. So when I think about myself being an amateur in a meeting with a scientist who is an expert, I ask the dumb questions. And what I tell my students is be fearless asking the questions when you're in meetings, because everybody else in the meeting is going to be terrified to ask that question, because nobody wants to look stupid in a meeting. Everybody wants to look like an expert when you're in a meeting with clients, with professionals, with consultants that come in that are being paid high dollar amounts. Yeah. They are being brought in to be an expert. And the problem with that is that we never ask why. We never ask the dumb question. And so once you do that, sometimes you get answers like, well, that's the way it's always been. That's the way we've always done it. I'm like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the right way to do it. So I think about it, getting back to traffic. I think, like, why are we managing traffic the way that we do in these? It doesn't make sense. The reason why we do it that way is because that's the way it's been done.
Yeah.
There are these processes in place. So I would love to see designers, it's like, way up in the food chain, upstream, because I think we're really good at asking those questions, and not everybody is. So I would love to see more of us in those kinds of spaces, asking those questions to maybe prompt different solutions, because that's fundamentally what we're looking for. What's a good solution to solve this problem? Rather than what's the solution we've always done to solve this problem?
How do we incrementally make the same thing move forward just an inch at a time? Yeah.
And then the last piece that I'll say about this, but I think it's instructive. It's particularly instructive for my students who I think it's a very strange time to be graduating right now. It's a weird economy. Nobody knows what's happening. It's been a weird economy for a while now. We've gone through these massive shocks, like since the housing downturn in 2008. I mean, ever since then, it's been like very topsy-turvy. And this period right now is very strange. You have no hiring, no firing. It's a weird moment. So when I look at the students and I look at the types of students we get, very often what I wind up seeing are people that I think they seem to have, and I think that they do have, for lack of a better term, an entrepreneurial bent to them, a spirit to them. And the benefit of that is that the moment that they're graduating into versus the moment many years ago that I graduated into, where there was no way to get funding, there was no way to do the fabrication side, now you can crowdfund it. Now the cost of manufacturing is so low that, and this is a term that I don't remember the name of the fellow who I heard it from first, moving from mass market to mass niche. And so the goal now, I think, if we think about designers who want to build stuff, so if you want to do policy side, I'm very happy if you want to do policy side. If you want to build stuff, the potential where we are is that you can find the right 5,000 people to buy your product. And there are 5,000 people out there for your specific product. So I feel like we are maybe moving towards this moment that we have talked about for a long, long time. And that was like making things bespoke for people, but through the methods of mass manufacture, making things that really work for that specific person.
That's rapid mass manufacturing.
That's rapid prototype. Yeah. All these things have folded into this moment to allow you not only to make those things, but to find the people that need them.
Right.
That's really astonishing if you think about generative AI and some of the uses that might be good around it. I have huge questions around the benefits of this because I think most of it will just be more junk being made faster.
Yeah.
I don't want that. But if you see people who need like scoliosis braces, which are some of the worst looking things ever designed, like you can do that for that person specifically. A beautiful design for that person, shoes that actually fit you. Like those things, the potential for it is so huge. And again, part of that is driven by the fact that we can find those people. Now, we couldn't do that before. You couldn't market to those 5,000 people. Now you can. We have all these tools available to us as designers to build the things that we want to bring to the market to those specific people. The potential is so huge for that. I love that as in theory. We'll see what happens, but I love it in theory. And I'm a big fan of crowdfunding because of that. You get weird ideas that get crowdfunded that would never make it to market otherwise. I might not want them, but that's the point. There are 5,000 other people that really want that barbecue cleaner thing that I'm like, how did that get to? But there really are people who want that. So.
Great. Rob, thank you so much for joining me. This has been absolutely wonderful. I appreciate you answering my questions. And I'm Max Beach. Keep asking questions.